Hello. Have you ever heard your wife's lover ask if he can borrow her for a night? No? You're lucky. But I didn't hang up. I didn't shout. I agreed. And what I did next? It didn't just destroy their little fantasy. It obliterated their lives. You know what's interesting? That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I did in response. They didn't have a clue that their fate was already sealed. If they had known what was coming, they'd have never dared to cross me. It started with the little things. It always does, right? You don't wake up one morning to find everything falling apart. It unravels thread by thread. Mia started staying late at work. Not every day, but often enough for it to catch my attention. "We've got a big project," she'd say with a sigh, dropping her bag by the door. "You know how it is." And for a while I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But then other things started piling up. She bought new clothes, ones that didn't really match her usual style. Tighter, sleeker. Like she was dressing for a date instead of a desk job. I didn't say anything at first because, hell, maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself. But then there were the gym trips. Late-night workouts, she called them. She'd grab her bag after dinner, kiss me on the cheek, and head out, claiming she wanted to clear her mind on the treadmill. That's when I started paying attention. You know the thing about lies? They're like breadcrumbs. They always leave a trail if you know where to look. Mia thought she was clever. She probably thought I wasn't noticing the changes. But I saw it all. The way she'd glance at her phone with that little smile. The way she'd rush to answer a text. The way her stories didn't quite line up if you paid attention to the details. The kicker? One night, she told me she needed new shoes for the office. Something about needing to look more professional. So I played along. "Sure, whatever you need," I said, even though I couldn't stop thinking. Since when does professionalism involve strappy heels and dresses that cost more than a week's groceries? Who exactly at the office needs that kind of outfit? Someone with leather couches and a minibar in their office. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't accuse her. I didn't start a fight. I just watched, and every move she made gave me more reason to dig deeper. Because here's the thing about me. I'm not the kind of man who explodes at the first sign of trouble. I don't yell, I don't slam doors. I observe, I plan, and when I strike, I make damn sure it counts. And even though I didn't know who she was sneaking around with just yet, I knew one thing for sure. Whoever he was, he had no idea what he'd just gotten himself into. When you suspect someone's lying to you, there's always that little voice in your head telling you to confront them right away. But here's the thing, confrontation without proof? It's just a waste of time. People like Mia, they're too good at spinning stories. If I wanted the truth, I had to go about this differently. I installed a GPS tracker in her car. It wasn't hard. Mia never paid much attention to things like that. It wasn't paranoia. It was strategy. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to slip up. I wanted to know where she was really going. The first couple of days? Nothing out of the ordinary. Her usual routine: work, grocery store, home. But then, a few nights later, her car stopped at a spot that immediately raised my eyebrows. A private club in the expensive part of town. And not just any club. This one had a reputation. Exclusive membership, a no-questions-asked policy, and an air of secrecy that practically screamed trouble. I decided to see for myself. I drove over, parked a few blocks away, and watched. Her car was there, tucked neatly between a line of luxury vehicles that definitely didn't belong to her coworkers. I sat there for hours waiting. No sign of her. She wasn't running errands. And she definitely wasn't at the gym. Whatever she was doing in there, it wasn't something she wanted me to know about. That's when I knew I needed more. The GPS was good, but it wasn't enough. So, I made a few calls, pulled a few strings, and got access to the club's security footage. Don't ask how, that's not the important part. The important part is what I saw. There she was. Mia walking into the club dressed to kill. A sleek black dress, heels that weren't meant for walking, and the kind of confidence you don't wear around your husband when you're just working late. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her was a man. Tall, broad shoulders, tailored suit. The works. He had this air about him like he owned the place. The way he touched her lower back as they walked inside? That wasn't the touch of a colleague. The smirk on his face? That wasn't a friendly smile. This guy didn't just think he was in control, he knew it. I sat there staring at the footage, every muscle in my body tense. I didn't know who he was yet, but it didn't matter. The way he carried himself told me everything I needed to know. He thought this was a game. He thought he was untouchable. But here's the thing about men like him. They get too comfortable. They underestimate the man on the other side. They think they're playing chess, but they don't realize I'm already 5 moves ahead. I didn't confront her, not yet. I wasn't going to tip my hand. Instead, I studied his face, his body language, every detail I could pick up. He looked so sure of himself, like the kind of guy who'd never been told no in his life. Well, that was about to change. I didn't know his name yet, and I didn't know why they'd picked that club. But one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end well for either of them. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Her late nights at work were starting to sound more like a cover story than an actual excuse, and the club incident made me question everything she'd been telling me. Something didn't add up, not just with her, but with her job. It was time to dig deeper. One evening, while she was out, I sat down with her work laptop. She'd left it unlocked, probably assuming I wouldn't bother looking. I'm not proud of what I did next, but let's be honest. She left me no choice. The first thing I checked was her email. Most of it was the standard office chatter, but buried in one folder were flagged messages with a name that instantly caught my attention. Jason. A name to go with the man I'd seen her walking into the club with. Their exchanges were revealing, to say the least. Messages about exclusive arrangements, delicate transactions, and requests for discretion. It didn't take a genius to figure out this wasn't your average client relationship. But it got worse. Attached to a few of the emails were files, spreadsheets, wire transfers, and what looked like payouts to third parties. The amounts were staggering, the kind of numbers that didn't belong on Mia's salary. I kept digging, my frustration giving way to a cold, focused anger. Jason wasn't just her lover, he was a client, and from what I could piece together, the two of them were knee-deep in some very shady deals. Her company, which I'd always assumed was just a standard corporate firm, seemed to be running under-the-table operations with Jason at the center. Suddenly, her long hours and new wardrobe made a lot more sense. She wasn't just covering up an affair. She was involved in something bigger, something messier, and she thought I wouldn't notice. I saved everything I could, emails, screenshots, financial records. This wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. This was about exposing the whole operation. They thought their little schemes would stay hidden, I said to myself, staring at the evidence piling up on the screen. But what they don't realize is, I don't just expose secrets. I shine a spotlight so bright it burns everything to the ground. And that's exactly what I planned to do. Jason, Mia, their secret deals, they'd built a house of cards. All I had to do was flick the first one, and the rest would come crashing down. This was only the beginning. When I found the messages and the financial records, I realized something important. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. No, this was something far bigger. Jason wasn't just some guy Mia was sneaking around with, he was her partner in crime. Literally. Now, I could have confronted her right then and there, but where's the sense in that? Shouting, accusing, losing my cool? That's what they were expecting. But I don't play by their rules. If you want to win, you don't show your hand too early. You wait, you plan, and when you strike, you make sure there's no coming back. So I started preparing. Not just for a confrontation, but for their complete downfall. First, I reached out to a few friends from my old cybersecurity days. Not everyone has contacts who specialize in digging up dirt, but I've always been good at keeping the right people close. I gave them Jason's name, the company Mia worked for, and a basic rundown of what I suspected. Within days, they handed me everything I needed. Jason's financial records, encrypted messages, transactions, everything. And let me tell you, it was uglier than I imagined. Offshore accounts, unreported income, and a string of payments tied to fake companies that didn't exist on paper. The man wasn't just a cheater, he was a walking felony. Meanwhile, I kept gathering my own evidence. Mia's work laptop, her phone, Every device she used became part of my investigation. I cloned her hard drives, downloaded her messages, and archived every single incriminating detail. Every text, every photo, every wire transfer. By the time I was done, I had enough evidence to not only destroy their lives but to bring their entire operation to its knees. But I didn't stop there. I started building a timeline, piecing together their movements, their interactions, and their deals. If they ever tried to lie their way out of this, I'd have a mountain of proof waiting to bury them. And while I was doing all this, they had no idea. They thought they were in control, that I was clueless, maybe even suspicious but powerless. It was almost funny. They think they're playing chess with me, I thought, as I stared at Jason's smug face in one of the photos I'd found. But they don't even know how the pieces move. And here's the thing about people like Jason and Mia. They always think they're smarter than everyone else. They get cocky. They stop paying attention. That's when you hit them the hardest. I started thinking about their weak spots, the cracks in their little empire. Jason's entire life revolved around his business and his reputation. He thrived on being seen as a powerful, untouchable figure. Mia, on the other hand, was desperate for validation. She wanted to feel important, like she was living some glamorous life far beyond what I could offer her. I decided to take both of those things away. The plan came together piece by piece. I'd hit Jason where it hurt most, his business, his finances, his image. And Mia? I'd make sure she couldn't even look in the mirror without seeing the fallout of her choices. By the time I was done, they'd regret every single decision they'd made. I leaned back, staring at the evidence I'd gathered, and let a small smile creep across my face. If you want to beat an enemy, I thought, first find their weak spot. Then make sure they dig their own grave. Now it was time to turn the tables. They thought they'd been in control, but that was over. It was my turn to put them under the microscope and make sure they felt every bit of what was coming their way. The call came on an unremarkable evening. I was sitting in the living room, finishing up some emails, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a gut feeling. Picking it up, I let my voice stay calm, controlled. "Hello. Hey," came the voice on the other end, smooth and confident. It didn't take me long to piece it together. "Jason. This is Jason," he said, like I should have known who he was. "I know this might sound strange, but, he paused, probably trying to decide how to phrase something so ridiculous. "Would you mind if Mia and I spent the evening together? It's important to both of us." There it was, the audacity of this man, asking me, her husband, for permission. I could almost hear the smirk in his voice, like he thought I'd crumble or explode, like he thought he was the one holding all the cards. I didn't lose my composure. I didn't yell, and I sure as hell didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I was already 10 steps ahead. "Of course, Jason," I said, my tone steady. "Just make sure you both are careful. I like my things to stay intact." There was a pause on his end, just long enough for me to know I'd thrown him off balance. Then he laughed, probably thinking I was either a pushover or too oblivious to catch on. "Thanks, man," he said casually, like this was just two buddies having a chat. "I appreciate it." I hung up, staring at the phone for a moment, and let a slow smile spread across my face. They thought they'd won, that I was blind to what was happening. But here's the thing. I just handed him all the rope he'd need to hang himself. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would he call me, of all people, to say something like that? Honestly, I have no idea. I don't even want to guess. Maybe it was part of some game he was playing, or maybe he just thought he could get away with it. Either way, it didn't matter. They thought I'd let it slide, that I was weak. But my game was only beginning, and they were about to learn that playing with me was the worst mistake of their lives. It was time to make my move. All their little secrets, their arrogance, their confidence that they'd never get caught. It was about to come crashing down. The first step was Jason's business. Thanks to the financial records I'd gathered, I had a treasure trove of dirt on him. Offshore accounts, illegal transactions, and enough shady deals to make any serious business partner think twice about working with him. I compiled everything into a neat little report. No name, no fingerprints, just cold, hard evidence. Then I sent it anonymously to his business partners. A man like Jason thrives on his reputation. He walks into a room like he owns it because he knows people trust him, respect him, maybe even fear him. So what happens when that trust is gone? When his closest allies look at him and see a liability instead of an asset? Within hours, I started hearing whispers. Deals were being paused. Questions were being asked. Jason's world wasn't falling apart yet, but the cracks were showing. But I wasn't done. Not even close. While Jason's business life was starting to unravel, I turned my attention to Mia. She thought she was living her best life, sneaking around, playing the part of the glamorous accomplice. She didn't know I had screenshots of every text, every flirtatious message, every incriminating conversation she'd ever had with Jason. And I knew exactly where to put them. Her corporate group chat was the perfect stage. The very people she worked with, the ones she saw every day, they deserved to see the truth. So I uploaded the screenshots there. No context, no explanation, just a flood of evidence that painted a very clear picture. Within minutes, the chat exploded. Shocked reactions, awkward silence, people asking, "Is this real?" And Mia? She had no way to deny it. The messages were hers, the pictures were hers, and the proof was undeniable. I could only imagine the look on her face when she realized her carefully constructed facade had crumbled in front of her entire office. "You thought I'd stay quiet?" I muttered to myself, leaning back in my chair.
No, sweethearts.
This is just the start of the show. What happened next? Let's just say Jason and Mia's names became toxic. Jason's business partners started pulling out, one by one, and Mia's career took a nosedive overnight. The fallout was only beginning, but I knew one thing for sure. They'd finally realized what it felt like to have their lives under the microscope. When you go after someone like Jason, you don't start by throwing punches, you start by pulling strings. Quietly, strategically. Let them think they're still in control while the walls close in. That's exactly what I did. The evidence I'd gathered on Jason wasn't just incriminating. It was explosive. Financial records showing unreported offshore accounts, falsified expense reports, and a trail of money laundering so obvious it practically screamed at anyone who cared to look. But I didn't just want to expose him. I wanted to make it personal. First, I created an anonymous email account, no name, no trace, just a ghost in the system. Then, I composed a report detailing every shady deal Jason had been involved in. It was thorough, almost clinical. Dates, amounts, screenshots, everything his business partners and investors would need to see the truth. I attached the evidence and sent it to everyone who mattered in Jason's professional life. His board members, his investors, even a few key clients. Within hours, the fallout began. I kept tabs on the chaos as it unfolded. Jason's partners started asking questions, holding emergency meetings. Rumors spread like wildfire, and suddenly, Jason was no longer the confident, untouchable man I'd seen walking into that club. He was a liability, a risk that no one wanted to associate with. Deals started falling through. Calls went unanswered. His entire foundation began to crack, and I was just getting started. But I wasn't going to let Mia off the hook, either. She'd built her life around appearances. Professional, polished, the perfect corporate image. So, I decided to show her coworkers and bosses exactly who she really was. I still had the screenshots of her private conversations with Jason, the late-night messages, the flirty texts, the not-so-subtle hints about their affair. But the real kicker? There were also exchanges about their little business ventures together. Deals they'd kept hidden, conversations that hinted at collusion, and language that was enough to make any company HR department see red. With one click, I uploaded the screenshots into Mia's corporate group chat. The entire office saw them, her boss, her colleagues, everyone she spent her days pretending to impress. The fallout was immediate. Phones started ringing. HR sent out emails. People whispered behind closed doors. Mia didn't even make it through the day before she was called into a meeting and handed her termination letter. The official reason? Violating company policy. But everyone knew the truth. Her reputation was in shambles, and she had no one to blame but herself. As I watched the chaos unfold, I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. You thought I'd stay quiet? I muttered to myself.
No, sweethearts.
This is just the start of the show. Jason's empire didn't just crumble, it imploded. Within days of the report going out, his business was in freefall. His partners severed ties, refusing to return his calls. Major clients backed out of deals, worried about being associated with someone under suspicion of fraud. Even his investors, the people who'd stood by him for years, wanted nothing to do with him. The media caught wind of the story, and Jason's name was dragged through the mud. Headlines painted him as a fraudster, a cheat, a man who built his success on lies. The public humiliation was relentless. By the end of the week, he'd lost everything. His business, his reputation, his income. And Mia? She wasn't faring any better. Being fired was just the beginning. Her colleagues wanted nothing to do with her. Word spread about her affair, her involvement with Jason, and the screenshots I'd leaked. Even her closest friends started distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. She tried to reach out to me, of course. A desperate text here, a voicemail there. All the same pathetic excuses. It's not what you think. I can explain. Please, let's talk. But I didn't respond. Why would I? She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. The beauty of it all was how seamless it felt. They'd built their lives on lies and arrogance, and I'd simply nudged the first domino. Everything that followed, the ruined careers, the shattered reputations, the financial devastation, was their own doing. They wanted to play with fire, so I made sure they burned. But here's the thing, this wasn't the end. Not for me, and definitely not for them. What I'd done so far, that was just the setup. The prelude. The real blow, the one that would make sure they never recovered, was still to come. And when it hit, it would be the kind of pain they'd never forget. Revenge is a dish best served cold. And I had been keeping mine in the freezer for weeks. Jason and Mia thought they'd survive the worst of it. The whispers, the firings, the humiliation. But that was just the warm-up. The real blow was still coming, and it was going to be spectacular. I started by planning the perfect setting. Party. Not just any party, though. A big, elegant gathering, full of our mutual friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. The kind of event where everyone shows up looking their best, expecting a night of good food, drinks, and polite conversation. The invitations went out, and people RSVP'd quickly. After all, who doesn't love a little social event to gossip about later? Mia was, of course, invited too. She wouldn't dare decline. Not with her reputation already in tatters and people questioning where she stood in my life. Jason wasn't on the guest list, but I knew Mia would find a way to bring him along. They couldn't resist the chance to try to salvage whatever shred of status they thought they still had. The night arrived, and the house was packed. Everyone was dressed to the nines, sipping wine, laughing, and chatting like they didn't have a care in the world. Mia showed up looking nervous but trying to act composed. Jason was right behind her, looking as smug as ever, like he still thought he was untouchable. I played the perfect host, polite, welcoming, not a hint of what was coming. I made small talk, refilled glasses, smiled at their awkward attempts to act normal. The tension in the air was almost palpable, but no one had any idea why. Then, at just the right moment, I dimmed the lights and tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming tonight. I began, keeping my voice calm and measured. It's always a pleasure to be surrounded by friends and loved ones. And tonight, I have something special to share with all of you. The room fell silent, every eye on me. Jason and Mia exchanged a glance, clearly unsure of what was happening. I walked over to the projector I'd set up earlier and pressed play. On the screen, a video began to play. A series of clips showing Jason and Mia together. Their conversations about their affair, their schemes, and even their cocky, arrogant comments about how they thought they'd gotten away with it. Their voices echoed through the room as they laughed about lying to me, about how easy it was to manipulate people. Every damning word, every disgusting smirk. It was all there for everyone to see. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the gasps and murmurs of the guests. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others turned to stare at Jason and Mia, who were frozen in place, their faces pale and horrified. And me? I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold. Watching as their little world came crashing down in front of an audience. When the video ended, I stepped forward again. "You wanted fame?" I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Well, here you go. But this isn't the kind of fame you'll enjoy." Mia tried to stammer something, but no one was listening. People were already whispering, pointing, shaking their heads. Jason looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The party ended soon after that, but not before the damage was done. Their friends? Gone. Their reputations? Destroyed. Their perfect little lies? Exposed for everyone to see. They thought they could play me. They thought they'd won. But in the end, they were nothing more than pawns in my game. And I made sure the world knew exactly who they were. Jason's fall was as spectacular as it was swift. The video was the final nail in the coffin. But the damage had started long before that night. His business was already in shambles. Partners had cut ties, clients had fled, and investors had labeled him toxic. With the scandal now public, no one would touch him. Lawsuits started piling up, and investigations into his shady dealings left him completely drained. Financially, emotionally, and socially. He went from the smug, untouchable man I saw at the club to a hollow shell scrambling to stay afloat. Mia wasn't faring any better. Her attempt to maintain some semblance of dignity after losing her job failed miserably. The affair had spread through her social circles, and the video became the talk of the town. Friends turned their backs on her. Family members stopped answering her calls, and even her closest allies distanced themselves from the fallout. She tried to explain, of course, claiming she made a mistake, that things got out of hand, but no one wanted to hear it. She wasn't just ostracized. She was erased. The two of them were left clinging to each other in the wreckage, but even that didn't last long. The strain was too much. The relationship they'd risked everything for quickly fell apart. As for me, I walked away from the ashes of their lives without a single ounce of regret. My focus was on moving forward. The divorce was swift and painless, well, for me anyway. The evidence I'd gathered left no room for argument. The judge didn't just grant me the divorce. I got full custody of our kids. Mia's involvement in Jason's schemes and the public scandal worked in my favor. The court decided she wasn't fit to be a parent, and her visitation rights were revoked indefinitely. It was poetic justice. The woman who thought she could juggle a double life was left with nothing. No job, no family, no friends, no future. Jason, the man who thought he was invincible, was ruined. I sold the house we'd shared, packed up the kids, and moved to a new city. A fresh start. I didn't need to stay and watch them wallow in their misery. I had better things to focus on: my kids, my career, and a life free of lies. There are moments you never forget. Like a phone call that shatters everything you thought you knew. Like finding out the person you trusted most was living a double life. Those moments change you. But even more unforgettable is what comes after. The moments where you pick up the pieces, take back control, and show the world and yourself that you're stronger than they ever expected. They thought they could break me. Instead, I broke them. And while they'll spend the rest of their lives haunted by the ruins they created, I'll be living mine without them. Some might call it revenge. I call it justice. Bye-bye.